Well, good evening. Good evening, everyone. It is I, the notorious RMB here. Greetings to all you imagination connoisseurs. Thanks for joining me on this. What's tonight? Monday night? A Monday night chat. I was so busy today, running all over the place. I couldn't do this afternoon. So I apologize. But thank you, all of you imagination connoisseurs, you, the members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Thanks for being here. So anyway, what I wanted to start out with talking about is first, for those of you who don't know, our new podcast, Best Worst Movie, that I'm doing with John Campea and Cody Miller, Olympic gold medalist Cody Miller. We just dropped our second episode today, and the premise of Best Worst Movie, for those of you who don't know, is we pick a subject matter. The first episode was the MCU. What is our favorite MCU film, and what do we think is the worst MCU film? Our second episode, 80s action movies. 80s action movies just dropped. It's available wherever you get your podcasts from. It's on iTunes. And what was so great about this podcast, I couldn't believe it. It debuted at number 10 on the iTunes film and television podcast charts. And today it went up to number 3 in the United States, and it's number 2 in both Canada and in the UK. Now, this fluctuates all the time. It's always changing, but pretty cool. I want to thank all of you who might have listened to it. It's a short, relatively short. You know, we're trying to. It's like 38, 40 minutes long. I think our 80s action movie podcast today, we actually recorded it today. It was pretty funny. So it's already available. We put it up, and we're going to do these like once a week, and it's probably going to be a season thing. So we'll do like 10 or 12 episodes or something like that. And then we're going to go on hiatus for a couple of months, and then we're going to come back. I don't think we're going to do them every week, but we designed it to be an evergreen podcast, and it's great that all of you are listening. Really, really appreciate it. Please subscribe. Tell your friends if you like it. It's great. Between doing Inglorious Trexperts, between doing Best Movie, Worst Movie, and doing John Campea's show and this, it's crazy. Maybe you're all going to be suffering from R&B overexposure, and you're going to want to put a bullet in my face. I hope not. I mean, I sometimes want to put a bullet in my face. What I wanted to talk about today, friends, is a glorious day for all of you lovers of physical media, and I know that many of you here at the Post-Geek Singularity community are. And today, A Clockwork Orange was announced, coming out on 4K disc. No date has been given, but A Clockwork Orange, one of my favorite films of all time, is coming out on disc. And you know, because I talk about it a lot, it fluctuates with The Godfather as being my favorite movie of all time. My production company, which is now, by the way, in its 17th year, Ludovico Technique, which is a Clockwork Orange reference. It shows how much I love A Clockwork Orange. So it's a fantastic day for me because it's coming out on 4K. Of course, earlier this year, at the end of last year, 2001 came out in a beautiful 4K version. Very excited today because I should have to say, something happened today, too. Speaking of Kubrick. This bad boy touchdown. This is a plastic model kit of the EVA pod. Open the pod bay door, please, Hal. I've wanted one of these my whole life. This is 1/8 scale. It's the Mobius models pod. I will probably be building this right here, and I could sit down and build it for you, but I can't build it yet because the lighting kit and I don't have those yet. They don't come out until like April, because I'm going to light this bad boy up. You know, you got to make it look like it's the inside of the pod bay. I mean, it's inside the EVA pod. You have to make it look, it's got to light up. It's got to look like the one in the movie. This thing is huge. It's like a basketball, and there's a lot of room to light it up. So it's been a Stanley Kubrick day here in the old Robservations headquarters, and I'm very excited about that. Now, I've talked a lot about A Clockwork Orange, and I've mentioned before on various podcasts how I worry that, one day that the progressive left, a lot of the people playing identity politics that are going to come home with pitchforks and they're going to burn my windmill down. I worry about my collection of movies. And one of the movies that I'm always talking about is A Clockwork Orange, and how I believe that, despite what kind of a movie it is, it worries me that, like, if I were to lecture at a college, which I've done in the past many times, and I wanted to teach a film course and use Clockwork Orange as a film to teach, I worry whether I could show it to a college age group of people. I worry a lot about it. And I'm going to read a letter, as you know. Again, tomorrow I'm going to read an extraordinary letter that I received from one of the members of the Post-Geek Singularity community over in England. But today I want to read another letter from Willow Yang. And Willow is one of my favorite people on these chats. She's Canadian. She's Chinese Canadian. And of course, I've read a number of letters from her and her missives. But this letter in particular is about A Clockwork Orange. And she sent it to me. And the reason, I use A Clockwork Orange as an example of a film that I dearly love, that I think its subject matter is incredibly rough. And I wonder if people today, especially, college age kids that want to have safe spaces and scream and yell and want things their way, if they would watch this film in an academic environment and even accept it, even watch it. Maybe I'm too paranoid, but as Tom Sizemore said in Strange Days, it's not whether you're paranoid, it's whether you're paranoid enough. Because you know what? Strange Days is another movie that is actually quite subversive, especially if you lived in post-riots LA. But anyway, so Willow wrote me. She sent this to my website, as I've told people. The Burnettwork.net is one of the best places, my website, where you can find me. And Willow wrote this message, and it's one of my favorite kinds of messages because it's somebody writing back about things that we've covered on the show, and it keeps, as I love to do, keep the conversation going. And I'd love to hear what you guys think about this letter. So this is what Willow Yang has written. Greetings, Rob. I feel very intimidated writing to you about my thoughts on A Clockwork Orange. I'm certainly not a movie critic. In fact, the last time I've written on a movie was probably for some high school assignment years ago. Moreover, this is one of your favorite films and one that you probably know like the back of your hand. I won't go in depth into analyzing the story. I just would like to focus more on my own personal experiences and reactions while watching the movie. Going into A Clockwork Orange, I knew the gist of the story, of course, the infamous singing in the rain scene, but not much else. I was surprised by its satirical, darkly comedic, and fantastical tone. The movie was thoroughly entertaining. I do feel a bit guilty for feeling this way, given all the physical and sexual violence that was depicted in the film, but I had fun during my viewing experience. From the way that I saw it, the story was being told from Alex's perspective, and thus all the violence and debauchery were presented in the way that his twisted mind envisioned them. The crimes he committed were heinous, but the surreality of the film lessened the emotional impact they had on me. How was I supposed to react to the scene where Alex fought and beat a woman to death with a giant phallic sculpture while a jaunty tune played in the background? The incident was absurd and comical as the crime itself was horrific. Alex was, without a doubt, deplorable. Yet I couldn't help but like, and at times, even relate to him. Full kudos to Malcolm McDowell and Stanley Kubrick for bringing such an incredible character to life. One moment that connected with me was when Alex read the Bible in prison. I remember reading the Old Testament for the first time as a teenager and being astonished and amused by all the violence, sex, and other debauchery that was in the, quote, good book. As ashamed as I am to admit this, I did pause the movie just to examine and chuckle over the graffiti outside of Alex's home. Suck it and see. She didn't write that, I'm just adding that. Times have changed, but human nature hasn't, and the art of vandalizing property with giant penises and other obscenities never gets old. Another moment that surprisingly tickled me was after Alec's suicide attempt, when he assured the audience that he didn't die because he wouldn't be able to narrate his story otherwise. I could just imagine Mr. McCloud, one of my high school English teachers, nodding his head in approval. He taught a creative writing class where we, being the angsty, sadistic teens that we were, would often write stories that ended with the protagonist dying in some grotesque manner. This habit drove Mr. McCloud insane because, as he reasoned, it would be impossible for a narrator to recount a story if they had died in it. I don't think Mr. McCloud saw Sunset Boulevard. Even though he had never mentioned A Clockwork Orange in class, knowing his personality, it is a movie I think Mr. McCloud would have loved. Personal experiences aside, I applaud this film's bold stance on choice and free will. The prison chaplain summed it up perfectly with the line, "Goodness comes from within. Goodness is chosen. When a man cannot choose, he ceases to be a man." I haven't read Anthony Burgess's novel, but from my understanding, the original story concluded optimistically, with Alex deciding to give up his life of depravity. Kubrick's decision to conclude the film with Alex arriving at the same spot where he had started seemed to make for a bleaker ending, but I believe that it was also more faithful to the spirit of the message. Even if Alex remained the way he was, that choice should be his own and nobody else's. I would like to conclude by thanking you for your engagement with the fan community. I've honestly had no interest in seeing A Clockwork Orange prior to hearing you expressing your passionate love for the movie. This might actually be the first Kubrick film that I've seen, and I very much look forward to now exploring more of his work. Yours sincerely, Willow. All right, as you can imagine, this letter and Willow's response to A Clockwork Orange is exactly why I bother with this channel. It's your commentary and the things that I get back from all of you guys that totally makes this all worthwhile. And listening to Willow's analysis of not just, I mean, she completely gets it. She totally understands what Clockwork Orange is about. It hit her in a visceral way. It does exactly what great cinema does to people. And it's why her response to Clockwork Orange was my response when I was 14 years old. And it was the very first time I'd ever shoved a VHS tape and watched a movie I'd never seen. I'd seen it, of course, in books like Alan Frank's Sci-Fi Now that I've talked about before, Sci-Fi, the pictorial history of science fiction movies that I poured over. But when I was 14 years old was the first time I saw Clockwork Orange, and I rented the tape, the Warner Home Video tape, and I brought it home, and it was the first time I ever watched a movie from all the way through, rewound it, and watched it again twice in a row all the way through. And I honestly, it blew me away. You know, I'd seen 2001, and at the time I'd seen The Shining, but I wasn't, I think I might have seen Dr. Strangelove as well, but I wasn't, Clockwork Orange just blew me away. The audacity of the direction, as I say, the verisimilitude, but in a completely fantastical context. I mean, it was, to my mind, just, I mean, I'd never seen a threesome scene shot speeded up to the thieving magpie before. You know, it was unbelievable. The film on so many different levels, and it's great, but it still gets me thinking. Do films like this, do films like A Clockwork Orange have a place in our culture? Does subversive cinema, and when I think about subversive cinema, I think about movies like Ken Russell's The Devils, which for some reason has been suppressed. Warner Brothers, it put it out, I had The Devils on VHS, but for some reason, its depiction of religion is somehow now verboten, and it has been locked away in a vault, and you cannot get it on either DVD or certainly not Blu-ray. Why is that? Like, I don't know. But I think that I don't know if it's the dumbing down of our culture, but I think that these kinds of movies that are subversive, I mean, directors like Ken Russell and directors like Stanley Kubrick and the agent provocateurs out there, the things that people were doing, the same kind of things that James Gunn got in trouble for at Disney, being that kind of a really dealing in the dark subjects, the dark underbelly of humanity. It's when a filmmaker like Stanley Kubrick delves into the darkness and does it in an let's face it, wildly entertaining way. Even though he's depicting, and as Willow picked up on it, the film is really, it's all from Alec's point of view. So his worldview is what's on display. And the scenes where he's talking about reading the Bible and what he envisions the Bible to contain. He doesn't care. As he says, he doesn't like all the preachy talk. He likes it when he uses the word toll chalking, and getting on the bed with his wife's handmaidens. He's talking all about that, and that's how he sees the world, and that's what the film is such an auteurist vision, and it's such a wonderful recreation of Anthony Burgess's book, but taken to a whole different level. That the film, I've returned to it again and again and again since that time when I was 14. I might have been 13 now that I think about it, but it was the first year I had a VCR, which I got in 1980, and it really changed my life. But the subversion of it was, and the fact that it is dealing with horrible violence, both to individuals and to the community, to the humanity as a whole. I mean, it really delves into subject matter that we as human beings have a really difficult time dealing with head on. But you watch it in the context again of a science fiction, fantasy, horror film, or a social commentary that's heightened, like a movie like Heathers, for instance. Heathers had a lot to say about teenagers, but it's not, by the way, the TV show. No, the original film. That was written by Daniel Waters and directed by Michael Lehman. I mean, those kinds of subversive films have been with us through the years, and I think that they have a very important place in our culture. And they presuppose, Stanley Kubrick was horrified that there was copycat crimes in England. There was a murder that was attributed to being a copycat crime to A Clockwork Orange. He was horrified, and he famously pulled the film from UK availability for decades because of that. But Kubrick and these people that are making these movies presuppose a certain level of intelligence on the part of the audience. And that's what I think is really important about these kinds of movies, is the fact that the audience is given the benefit of the doubt. The audience is expected to be smart. The audience is expected to know what they're seeing. They're supposed to be literate. They're supposed to understand what Stanley Kubrick is going for. And I wonder, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong to worry about this, because certainly Willow got out of it, based on her letter, exactly what I would hope somebody would get out of it when they watch it. But obviously, as we know from Willow's interaction here and other letters I've read of her, she's very, very smart. And I believe she's some kind of a scientist. I don't know. But, I mean, she literally could be a rocket scientist for all I know. But getting letters like hers, when I get someone else to watch something that's meant a lot to me, and I don't expect every one of you to go out. Like, I don't expect you guys to, go see To Live and Die in LA and then go buy all 4 copies of it, get the Japanese Blu-ray, the UK Arrow Blu-ray, the Shout Factory Blu-ray, and the original MGM Blu-ray. I don't expect you to do that kind of stuff. I don't. I'm insane, so I have 4 different copies of To Live and Die in LA. It's the same movie. I don't know why. Why do I have 4 copies of Gladiator? No idea. The Dawn of the Dead, that's just an obsession I've had. I had to have every copy of Dawn of the Dead for a long time there. Now I'm waiting for the Second Sight definitive version that's coming out, and I can put my Dawn of the Dead fixation to rest. After the Second Sight disc comes out later in the year, I never have to buy Dawn of the Dead again. But it really means a great deal to me that you guys, when I say something and I get letters, I'm always surprised. I always forget, oh yeah, I mentioned that on the show. But I really like it when you guys, and a lot of you have been sending me some great emails about things you've watched or things you've experienced or ideas you have. I love getting those letters, and I'm going to try and read more and more and more of them. But it's great, and I love hearing what you have to say. And I'm curious, how do you guys feel now in this day and age? Does society need to be protected from these films? Are we, in our desire to be inclusive and woke, and are films like this? I mean, I hope this never is the case, but can films ever be just too difficult? People can't handle them? Or should we expect human beings to always be able to handle? I told the story of on an earlier talk about even the guys that were showing me Texas Chainsaw and I Drink Your Blood wouldn't show me Pier Paolo Pasolini's Solo, the 120 Days of Sodom. Like, that's where they drew the line. And, you know, when I finally saw that film, it's a rough movie, and it's really hardcore. And it's got some of the most disgusting things you'll ever see in a movie that's considered basically an art film. But when I finally saw it, I understood it. It wasn't like Clockwork Orange. It's not entertaining the way Clockwork Orange is. Clockwork Orange is wildly entertaining for all of its subversion and difficult subject matter. I think at the end of the day, it has a lot of really interesting and very important commentary about the human condition and free will and choice. And Willow nailed it. I mean, she knew exactly what the movie was trying to say. So again, it's something that in my mind, yes. As you all know, I love genre literature. I love science fiction, fantasy, horror, and I really think that there's a value to it, as long as the audience, you know, has a certain level of maturity. And that's what filmmakers like Kubrick would presuppose, is that the audiences understood what it was he was trying to do. The great thing that I loved about Stanley Kubrick is he assumes his audiences are smart enough to get the messages that he's trying to put across in his in his wildly entertaining, somewhat subversive way. And that's why I really love his films. His films are, they have, I talk about verisimilitude. Stanley Kubrick movies, they have their own verisimilitude. Kubrick has his own verisimilitude that works within the confines of his films, because what's really interesting is almost no moments in Kubrick's film, aside from 2001, which is all about verisimilitude. I think I once read that the only scientific mistake in 2001 is when somebody sips in their food from one of their liquid packs. Maybe it's the Dr. Floyd going to the moon on the Ares 1B. You actually see the liquid in the straw go back down as if it's in a gravity environment, which it was because they were filming it in a soundstage. But that's apparently the only technological or scientific mistake in 2001. So apparently, at the time at least. And I think that his films are so stylized, and yet they create their own reality that casts a spell like none other. So I encourage all of you. I mean, whether it's Dr. Strangelove or Barry Lyndon, or, you know, The Shining is different. I think The Shining is Kubrick's really only one straight up genre movie. I mean, he's really making a horror film. I don't think that there's a whole lot of social commentary, and that I've read about that, but there's really not. He's just trying to scare you in his very Stanley Kubrickian way. And I think he does a good job. That movie mostly takes place in high daylight, high key lighting. It only gets dark really at the end when they're outside in the maze. But anyway, it was great to hear Willow's response to Clockwork Orange, and it struck me again reading her reaction. She never particularly wanted to see it. She didn't know anything about Clockwork Orange, but she watched the film and got out of it a great deal. And that sort of gives me hope. When young people can watch these things that mattered to me for a long period of time, it's great that people can still be affected by them. But I throw the question out to you guys. Should filmmakers make movies like this? We don't have them now, of course, because I don't think a studio would ever have made A Clockwork Orange today. I really don't. Maybe some indie filmmaker would make it, and A24 would pick it up. But like Ari Aster's Hereditary, that's got some pretty harsh stuff in it, but it got made. But when you're making a horror film, you can get away with a lot more. But I mean, depictions of rape that we saw in 70s movies, whether it was in A Clockwork Orange, whether it was Last House on the Left, whether it was in Thriller, A Cruel Picture. I mean, you can't do those things anymore. They wouldn't fly. And I don't know if I would even attempt something like that. I don't know if we need to see that, but those films existed, and they were being made for audiences and shown to the general populations back in the 70s. And they happened. Now, you couldn't have, I don't think there's necessarily a need to depict that subject matter the way it's been depicted in the past. But if you had a good reason, perhaps if you were showing what was going on and what has gone on with ISIS and what goes on in the world every single day, Can you depict these things? Are we capable as a society of seeing these things on film? Are we mature enough? I mean, I don't know anymore, because I don't think if The Last Jedi had come out or Captain Marvel had come out in 1973 and the internet existed, we wouldn't see the kind of weird vitriol that we're seeing on the internet now. But that's just me, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that was always there, bubbling beneath the surface, and who knows? Who knows? All I know is that Stanley Kubrick's Clockwork Orange is going to be restored, or not restored, but at least put out in 4K, which means they're going to have to retransfer it yet again. And if Warner MPI, Warner Motion Picture Imaging, that's on the Warner lot, if they're going to do the restoration, I'm sure it's going to look pristine. I hope Leon Vitale is involved with the restoration of the film at 4K. It's not like you can't really screw up Clockwork Orange, but I hope Leon Vitale is involved. I hope at least they use his notes, and I can't wait that one of my favorite films is going to make it to 4K disc before physical media goes away. So anytime. Anyway, that's what I want to talk about tonight. So I'm going to look down at what people have to say. George Grenado asks, what 3D TV do you recommend at a good price point? George, I don't know. I am running my Panasonic 65-inch plasma. It was the last 65-inch plasma that Panasonic made. Panasonic took over my beloved Pioneer's plasma business. They took over Pioneer's Curo technology, their black technology, and it's still my favorite TV that I've ever owned. I'm looking for, I would love to find the Panasonic. You could get a Panasonic OLED in the UK, but the one I wanted, which was 77 inches, it was like $12,000. And even I, in my insanity, could not justify spending that. So, and 3D TVs are pretty much going away. You can still get them in Europe. So I have to say, I don't know much about the current state of 3D TVs, but I'm gonna have to look into it, because I think I might have to buy one and put one away or something. Broovies with Matt. How are you, sir? Kubrick. I need them to announce The Shining now. You can bet your bottom dollar that after 2001 and The Shining, and Clockwork Orange, The Shining cannot be far behind. The Criterion transfer of Barry Lyndon is absolutely stunning. That Blu-ray is absolutely stunning. Willow Yang. Thank you, Willow. Evening, Rob. Have another great show. Well, I read your letter. I hope you didn't say not to. So, yeah. Senor Eric says, what do you love or dislike about A Clockwork Orange? There's nothing I dislike about it. I love everything about it. I love the fact that it creates a very stylized world that you buy into from the beginning. Now, I know there's some of you that are going to say, why is the scene in the Durango 95 as it purred away real horror show? Why did Kubrick use rear projection? Why didn't he just mount a camera to the hood of that car and drive it around? Well, I think that's part of it. I think that's, Kubrick does a lot of very cheeky, funny things in A Clockwork Orange. That's one of them, especially showing in the record store. There's a record for a 2001 soundtrack or something. I mean, Clockwork Orange is incredibly stylized. It's and everything about it I love. I love the stylization. I love what he goes for. It is not set in the real world. It's set in Stanley Kubrick world. And another thing, I just love first of all, I love the entire story. It's an odyssey. A character is basically on an odyssey, a long odyssey of self-discovery. And it's an incredible tale. The whole idea about what happens in the film, how Alex, this young thug, horrible, awful person, winds up a political pawn within the prison system, and then he is used by a political party to try and create an end to crime. I mean, there's so much about A Clockwork Orange to love, but really it's the story itself. And ultimately, it's the message of the film that even though you can choose to do evil, it's better for a human being to have the ability to choose than it is to have free will stripped from that person. And even though Kubrick's message is presented in a very dark way, I mean, it's ironic that that's his message, but then we see, of course, how he brings that message across to us, and it's very audacious. And again, that was part of the book too. But I think Clockwork Orange, the movie, is actually better than the book, honestly. I think it's more concise and easier to understand. The book has this foreign language, this crossed nadsat, this mishmash of English and Russian, and you have to keep flipping to the back of the book when you read it to know what do these words mean, and it's pretty interesting. Christian Lynch is here. Christian Lynch says, that was a phenomenal analysis. Thank you for sharing her full thoughts. Well done, Willow. Yes, well, here's the thing. I cannot stress enough how much I love getting the letters that you're sending me. The one I'm going to read tomorrow on my show at noon is pretty extraordinary. And that was one from longtime viewer Celadon Sound, who's been here a lot. He has a really interesting and very personal story that he told me. And, it's you guys sending me these stories in that make it really, really worth my while. And I hope it's worth your while to hear these stories. And judging from what you had to say, apparently so. And that's that. Look, I'm not going to take credit for anyone else's thoughts. That's why I like to read people's names. And if you don't want me to say your name, I won't. People have said, just say my first name and I understand. But I don't even, I'm so flattered, and I'm so really in wonder at all the great things that all this. I wanted to start conversation here. That was the whole point of this channel, and what people have been sending me, and I think the conversation that we've all got going here is phenomenal. It's fantastic, and kudos to you guys. And I every day I open up the mail, I'm like, what am I going to get today? And some people are sending me things like endgame theories, and those are good too. And but I feel like we cover that stuff so much on the John Campea show, but not that I've got a few I'm going to read. Please don't stop. Don't let me stop you from sending anything you want to send to me, because I want to hear it all. Mercer Create says that Cloud Atlas is a modern subversive sci-fi classic. Now, for those of you who might not know, Cloud Atlas was a phenomenal book. First of all, I really loved the book. And then the film was famously directed by Tom Tykwer, who did Run Lola Run, and the Wachowskis. The three of them, they directed it. They had a threesome. And they directed the movie together. I really like Cloud Atlas. I know that sometimes the makeup effects and actors playing multiple roles didn't work for a lot of people, but I bought into it. I really enjoyed it. I'll tell you something. I guiltily, I'll flat out admit this. I'm going to admit to you guys something I don't admit to many people. I like Jupiter Ascending. I know. I really just like the Wachowskis' filmmaking style, and I actually went to a test screening for Jupiter Ascending on the Warner Brothers lot that the Wachowskis were in attendance for, and I went there with some friends of mine, and none of them liked it. I liked it. Tom Gillard says, you have an adorable dog and cat. Important question. How do they get along, and how old are they? Well, Tom, that's a good question. Gilbert is 15 months old. Gilbert's birthday is the 6th. His month birthday is this. He was born December 6th, 2017. Yes? 2017? Yes. And he celebrated his 15th month on this planet at the beginning of this month. And Skippy John Jones, my girlfriend Elizabeth already had Skippy John Jones before I met her, but Skippy John Jones is, I believe, 6 years old. Her tail is healing well. And yes, they're a funny cat, and both of them are full of personality. And Gilbert is very fascinated with Skippy. He always likes to touch her and sniff her and play with her. And Skippy, in typical cat form, can't be bothered. Although I kind of think she does like the attention. She does like to torment him, and she does like to put her claw into his furry face. Luckily, he's got a lot of fur there. Otherwise, she'd probably catch him on the snout and cut his snout open. But Skippy can be a very aloof cat, and she's very demanding. But nothing is better when she comes up here and Gilbert comes up here at the end. One of my chats, I couldn't have planned it better. But thank you for asking. It's a barrel of laughs. And I've been told, although I have yet to see this, that Gilbert is getting a sister. Yes, Gilbert is a Bernedoodle, a Bernese Mountain Dog, and poodle. And I've been told that we're getting another dog, an Irish Doodle, which I think is an Irish setter mixed with Doodle. But I forget the terminology, but it's 50-50. Gilbert's like 25% Bernese Mountain Dog and 75% Poodle. But this new dog, this female dog, who rumor has it is named Tallulah, which I was explaining to Elizabeth, the only Tallulah I know is Jodie Foster from Bugsy Malone. If you guys seen everyone's seen Bugsy Malone, right? With the splurge guns. Well, if you haven't seen Bugsy Malone, check that out, because everybody needs to see Bugsy Malone. Because doesn't Jodie Foster sings a song, my name is Tallulah. I used to love that movie when I was a kid. I've got it on Blu-ray, but I think I only watched it once. I have an import Blu-ray of Bugsy Malone. Do people watch Bugsy Malone anymore? I don't even know. Katon Toothman says, bro, I just lost so much respect. Jupiter Ascending. Listen, man, I understand. I get it. I think Jupiter Ascending is a hot mess. But you know what? Like Star Crash, there are movies that we can love that people, I will not defend Jupiter Ascending and say it's a great film. I do think, however, that there's something about it that I that I like, but I'm sorry, I know it's terrible. Wait till Kino Lorber's disc of Tough Turf comes out, and I wax rhapsodic about Fritz Kirsch, director of Children of the Corn. Fritz Kirsch's 1985 masterpiece, Tough Turf, starring Kim Richards, Tia from Escape to Witch Mountain, James Spader, Robert Downey Jr., and Olivia Barish from Repo Man. Come on, man. Tough Turf. There are bad movies that I love, but they're wildly entertaining. Murray Reich sends me a super chat. Murray, thank you, sir. Thank you for that. Victory Unlimited Show says, I think that the subversive concept of ageism is wonderfully explored in Logan's Run. Do you think it's time for a remake? George Perez's Marvel Comics adaptation was also great. Francis #Francis7 had it coming. Okay, for those of you who don't know, my beloved 1976 Logan's Run, directed by Michael Anderson, starring Jenny Agutter, Michael York, and why am I drawing a blank? Richard Jordan and Peter Ustinov and Roscoe Lee Brown as Box, and Farrah Fawcett Majors. Logan's Run is a film that's based on a novel by William F. Nolan and George Clayton Johnson, who famously wrote Star Trek. George Clayton Johnson was one of the people that wrote the original Ocean's 11, the movie. George Clayton Johnson also wrote the Kick the Can episode of Twilight Zone. So they wrote this book together in the late 60s, and Logan's Run was really about, in the book, unlike the movie. So there's this utopian civilization after an apocalypse. They live in this dome city, and everybody at 30 has to undergo the fiery ritual of carousel, where they are renewed. They're actually just put to death, and their bodies are recycled for resources. And it's about this utopian civilization. And as Sandman, one of the police officers of this society, ends up having to run, and that's why it's called Logan's Run, and run away from I don't want to tell you anymore. If you haven't seen Logan's Run, I will admit it's a little hard to watch now. The movie opens with this miniature of this giant dome city, and it's not going to fool you. It looks like it's a tabletop miniature, which it pretty much is. I think it's cool. I saw it in the theater when I was a kid. It blew my mind. But it really does talk. It is about ageism, and really it comes out of the 60s, the idea of never trust anyone under 30. In the book, interestingly enough, people are put to death when they're 21. And I highly recommend it. They've been trying to remake Logan's Run for years. Interestingly enough, Bryan Singer was going to direct Logan's Run after Superman Returns, and he prevised basically the whole movie. You could watch Bryan Singer's version of Logan's Run. It took place in an orbiting like a Gundam-esque or a Babylon 5-esque station in orbit around the Earth, it would have been really, really cool, really, really interesting. But it's the movies. To me, it's a sci-fi classic. When my friends all turned 30, everybody used to get a Logan's Run movie poster, a real movie poster. But yeah, I think Logan's Run again. And the books, there's famously, there are sequels. There's 3 Logan's Run books. There's Logan's Run, and then there's the sequel, Logan's World, and that was also just written by William F. Nolan, and Logan's Search, also written by William F. Nolan. And yep, George Perez did draw the Marvel Comics adaptation of Logan's Run that went a little bit beyond the movie. There was also a TV series that wasn't very good. But Donald Moffat played an android named Rem, and it looked like it was shot in the Universal backlot, but not a great show. Keaton Toothman says, Channing Tatum on skates. You like that? Yes, I know you're laughing your ass off. I get it. But you know what? Look, if you grew up reading Heavy Metal magazine and comic books, so there's like a pointed-eared half-wolf guy flying around on skates. What's not to love? Maybe probably a lot, come to think of it. So you might be right about that. Keith on Toothman says, I own it on 4K. It's yours if you want it. You have a 4K version of Logan's Run. Do you have a hard copy of it? Because I want that. Where is that? Where is my? Because it's in. I don't know if it's in. I think it's in Todd-AO. It was shot in Todd-AO, so it's very widescreen, very widescreen. I mean, it's got some really wacky stuff in it. Do you know if Tom Gillard asks, do you know if John Schnepp liked or disliked The Last Jedi? I can't find his thoughts on it anywhere. I think he did. I'm not sure. By the way, I'm looking on this. Daniel Yama says, Rob, do you have you seen the 1/6 scale Virtual Toys Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd figure? Thoughts? Yes, I have, and yes, I'm going to buy it. It looks great, and they still have them at the Monkey Depot. That's a place for look if you want to find figures. It's really great. It was on their homepage. Jean-Paul Gaultier designed that costume. It's interesting. I have another. I've got the first Metacom release of Sylvester Stallone as Judge Dredd. It's not a very good figure, but that release looks pretty dope, and the head sculpt is great. Really cool. Keaton Toothman says, you got my respect back, laugh out loud. I feel that I love bad horror. Yeah, see, we all like bad horror movies. I mean, look, I've got a movie that everybody should see, although Guillermo del Toro famously produced the remake, which is Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. Now, my beloved Warner Archive, I know you guys, a lot of you aren't into physical media, but let me tell you, if you haven't seen the TV movie version of Don't Be Afraid of the Dark that I think was made in, I want to say 73, starring Kim Darby. It was when I was 5 years old or whatever, 5, 6, 7. It was the scariest movie I ever saw in my life. Though a lot of people remember Trilogy of Terror with the Zuni fetish doll. But if you guys, I mean, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, you go back and you watch it now, it's pretty crazy. But people be like, why were you scared of this? But let me tell you, when you're a kid, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark was the scariest shit ever. So look, I've lost my tolerance for bad horror. I don't think I was always kind of a horror snob, to be honest, but I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, I love horror movies more than people. It's funny because, when I was at Collider, they were doing Collider Nightmares, and Clark Wolf loves horror. She really knows her stuff. And Schnepp loves horror, but I was like, man, I am Mr. Horror. I produced The Hills Run Red, for God's sake. I mean, I'm a fanatical horror novel reader, and I love all horror movies. Well, not all horror movies, but I am a snob. My taste in horror is snobbish, and I kind of apologize to that. Murray Reich just sent me a super chat just to say #justice for Shaw. Come on, man. Why do people not love Sun Kang? Come on, justice for Han, everyone. And by the way, how wacky is it that Tokyo Drift is actually a sequel to Fast and the Furious 4, 5, and 6? What film series has ever done that? I mean, sometimes You go back and you'll see the first Purge, and I guess you could say the first Purge is actually, but that's just a prequel. Whereas Tokyo Drift, look what they did with that movie. Look what they did. It was all for Sun Kang. Look what Justin Lin did for his buddy Sun Kang. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's never been done in cinema history. So think about that. GW427 says, do you consider some of Tarantino's films subversive? Absolutely. I think Tarantino's movies, I think Reservoir Dogs, has a lot of subversive elements. The scene with the cop getting his ear cut off. By the way, my favorite Quentin Tarantino movie, I think, is still Reservoir Dogs. I love his oeuvre, his output of movies, but there's something about that first seeing Reservoir Dogs that really knocked me out. I loved Reservoir Dogs. I thought it was great. But yeah, I think his use of violence and his juxtaposition of even like he's taken a lot of flack for the racial epithets his characters spout, and I can see why. But yeah, I think his movies definitely have an element of subversion in them, and that the poster for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood dropped today. It's not exactly a great poster, but anyway. Keaton Toothman says, no, laugh out loud. Jupiter is sending on 4K if it's yours if you want. What makes you think I don't already have it, though? I thought you meant the other thing. Odai Alamani. First time ever catch you live. Great stuff. Well, Odai, thanks for being here. I've noticed there's some Mark C just busts out. All right. Okay. Let's hear it from Mark C. Not into bad horror, but I'll watch bad sci-fi any day. Anybody have a 4K version of Prayer of the Roller Boys with Speed Bagger? Okay. Prayer of the Roller Boys came out, I want to say, in 1990, and it's about it's a dystopian future in Venice, California. You guys, you've got to see. I have a crappy DVD of it, and I think it's a widescreen movie, but I've got a pan and scan DVD. It was financed by Japanese money, but it's basically about this gang of white supremacists that want to kill immigrants and kill people that aren't white. But they roll. It's like the douchebag gang from the Warriors, and they roll around. They go around on roller skates as if. But it's actually pretty good. I like the movie. It's pretty good. It's a little hard to take seriously because it's called Prayer of the Roller Boys. But if you want to watch a dystopian gang movie set in Venice, California, with dudes on roller skates while they're wearing long jackets, it's your movie, and I own it. When I was working at Warner Brothers in 1989, I had a Prayer of the Roller Boys poster up in my office. I had that in Solar Crisis. So Mark C, kudos for you to know Prayer of the Roller Boys. Tom Gillard asks, have you seen The Intern with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway? Funny, heartfelt movie. You know what? First of all, I love Anne Hathaway. Big fan of hers. And I did see The Intern, and I did like it. I thought it was a nice, sweet, lovely film. I thought it was great. How can you not love that? Victory Unlimited, thank you. Wow, thank you very much, sir. Victory Unlimited says, Wild in the Streets is another good subversive movie from the late 60s that was about a rock star who becomes president. I know, man. Wild in the Streets is great. It also has a Don't Trust Anybody Over 30 theme, too. It inspired the original DC comic Prez. You ever see that one? Laugh out loud. Victory Unlimited is right. Wild in the Streets is a really interesting movie. And yes, indeed, if you guys haven't seen DC, actually, Amy Dallin on Heroes turned me on to the new Prez miniseries that came out a few years ago. But there was a DC comic in the 70s called Prez about a teenage president of the United States that I actually would read as a kid. But Wild in the Streets is really interesting. There's another, to speak along that, along those lines. One of my favorite filmmakers is a filmmaker that's very unsung in the United States. Not a lot of people know him, but his name is Peter Watkins. And he made a movie called Gladiator, which is a sci-fi film about fighting wars through gladiatorial games, but not like in an arena. And then he made a movie called The War Game, which is a faux documentary about a nuclear strike, what would happen. And then he also made a movie called Punishment Park that's kind of along those lines. And he was active in the late 60s and 70s. I don't know whatever happened to Peter Watkins. I have some of his movies on Blu-ray, but he's definitely worth checking out. When I first had my VCR back in 1980, I was looking for all these movies and finding them. A lot of them are available, but Wild in the Streets is definitely one worth checking out. So thank you very much, by the way, for that super chat. I really appreciate the support. And also the fact that you saw that movie. It's really interesting because there's a really rich history of edgy, dystopian, strange science fiction fantasy movies that came out in the late 60s and early 70s, movies that I think you guys should seek out if you're interested in them. The Final Program. If you haven't seen a movie called The Final Program, I would check that out, or the Final Program, or The Last Days of Man on Earth, based on Michael Moorcock's Jerry Cornelius books. That's a really interesting movie. There's a really incredible science fiction film called World on a... It was actually, I think, a television miniseries done for German TV called World on a Wire. I would definitely check that out. Criterion released that. It's kind of an early... It talks about virtual reality, very Matrix-esque stuff. The Ultimate Warrior with Yul Brynner. I mean, if you haven't seen one of my favorites, if you love Logan's Run, the original Rollerball, Norman Jewison's 1975 Rollerball, check that out. If you haven't seen Rollerball, really interesting, especially you'll recognize things like the Hunger Games are in there, things like Battle Royale are in there. Certainly Battle Angel Alita, the original manga took from Rollerball, but starring James Caan and John Houseman and Maude Adams. I mean, Rollerball is a movie that, it was one of those movies when I was a kid, it was like, ooh, this means something. There was all these great dystopian, Soylent Green being another one. Soylent Green, I know, but when you go back and you actually watch Soylent Green, really interesting. Although a lot of people will get triggered by the fact that women are considered furniture in that movie, just a fair warning. But there's a lot of really interesting genre movies. A Boy and His Dog is another one, starring Don Johnson, believe it or not. Jason Robards. Again, there's so many rich, interesting genre films in the 1970s, science fiction films that are pretty much forgotten. And I would say Wild in the Streets is a great example from the 60s. John Frankenheimer's 7 Days in May, if you haven't seen that. John Frankenheimer made, if you guys haven't watched John Franken, I'm totally going off on a tangent here, but if you haven't seen John Frankenheimer's 60s movies, like Birdman of Alcatraz, The Manchurian Candidate, Seconds, which is one of my favorite science fiction films of all time, 7 Days in May, The Train. I mean, these are all incredible movies. But if you like science fiction and speculative fiction, you like The Twilight Zone, please seek out Seconds. It was shot by the great cinematographer James Wan Howe, black and white, unbelievable film. Check it out. I know I'm going off on a tangent. Keaton Toothman says, it's also my first time here. I noticed I've never come across your name before. Am I saying it right? Keaton Toothman. I love that. I want to know what it means. Also my first time here. Just started watching the John Campea show, and I dig your take on most stuff. Glad I could catch this. Can't wait for more. Love it. Well, thank you. I love you being here. It's really been gratifying to see more and more subscribers. Please subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends. Interact here, because it's been great watching this community sort of grow and build, and like tonight, because then I can talk about like Clockwork Orange, but now I'm talking about John Frankenheimer movies in the 60s, which is why it's so much fun to just sit here, and because I don't get to geek out about this stuff. There's no reason for me to talk about it. I don't walk around. Like, sometimes I feel like I should just stop people on the streets and go, have you seen Seconds? Did you know that it was shot by the great James Wong Howe, who also shot The Sweet Smell of Success, one of the great black and white cinematographers? You can't do that. Can't do that to passersby, although sometimes I think about doing that to passersby. Joe Zapata asks, did you enjoy working on Superman Returns with Bryan Singer? I loved it. The 10 months I spent in country in Australia, following Brian around with the camera, I had so much fun, and it was so great working on Superman Returns. I loved it, and I hope if you ever get the box set of Superman discs, whether it's Blu-ray or DVDs, you can actually see I made a 3-hour documentary on the making of Superman Returns called Requiem for Krypton, which is on the Blu-ray, and you can also watch. Interestingly enough, we did these blogs, these video blogs, Brian's blogs, and I did them with Adam Robitel. Adam Robitel, who just directed Escape Room, and he's directing Escape Room 2. He directed Insidious 4, The Last Key. It was me and Robitel, man, and a couple people from Warner Brothers as well. And it was so much fun to be down in Australia. I had such a good time. I could tell stories for days. Mark C says, there's a terrible live-action version of Fist of the North Star. Christopher Stone's score is the only reason to watch, but I still love it. You know, I was bummed. I have the Fist of the North Star when was it Viz Comics put it out. I really liked it, and the movie. You're right, man. It's not good. Muggin 008 or Muggin 008. Are you Muggin Agent 008? Hello, RMB and fellow imagination connoisseur. First time chat, long time viewer since AMC Heroes episode 6. Man, you remember the first time I was on Heroes? Yes, I was in Heroes episode 6, dude. That's going way back. Here for the excellent discourse, Robert. Well, I hope the discourse is good, because if it's not, then I'm not doing it right. But I hope my discourse is good. Keaton Toothman is actually my full name. Really? What a great name. That's an awesome name. I'd love if I was named Keaton Toothman, I'd just tell that name to everybody. That's a fantastic name. I love that name. How can you not love that name, being named Keaton Toothman? What is that? I want to know, where does that name come from? Like, I have no idea where that is. It a nationality? Is it a family name? I don't know what it means. I want to know now. I want to know everything. But if it's your full name, I love it. Mark C says, "Sir, I own a hard copy of Hawk the Slayer with Jack Palance, the evil brother." Hawk the Slayer. You know, it's right up there with Yor, the Hunter from the Future. You can't miss that. Victory Unlimited show says, "Hey, I watched Free Enterprise again recently. Is there a story behind the great end credit song Satellite?" Yes, as a matter of fact, there is a story behind that. So as many of you know, I made this movie called Free Enterprise. It's celebrating its 20th anniversary on June 4th of this year. We needed an end song for the movie, and there wasn't one. And the soundtrack album had already gone to press, so that's why Satellite is not on the soundtrack album. But so Lauren Christie, who's done a lot of writing, she teamed up with my composer, who, yes, his real name was Scott Spock, and they wrote this song for the end credits. They wrote Satellite, and they gave it to me, and I was blown away by it. If you guys, I'll tell you what, no one has asked me about this in a while. Because Satellite is not on the soundtrack, whenever anybody asks me about it, I've always sent them a copy, just a file, so you can have it to propagate the song throughout the universe, because there's no way to get it. The only person you can get it from is me. So if you want that song, send me an email to my regular email, rmburnett1701@gmail.com, or write me on the Burnettwork website and ask me for Satellite, and I will send you a copy of the file, because everybody should have Satellite. It's a great song. It's a geek love song, and how many of those have been written in the world? I don't know. Keaton Toothman says, "I'm curious if you've ever seen Enter the Void." Dude, okay. Remember I said earlier in this chat that I watched Clockwork Orange twice back to back? Well, let me tell you, another movie that I watched twice back to back, and it's a feat, because it's like Clockwork Orange. It's long, but Enter the Void's 3 hours. I watched Enter the Void twice back to back. I was fucking sorry, I shouldn't say that. I was blown away by Enter the Void. I was like, how do they do that? And I had to watch the special features. I was Gaspar Noé. It's funny. I'll tell you something. Since you brought that up, it's playing in American theaters, but I just got Gaspar Noé's latest film, Climax, which I haven't seen, which is apparently about a group of dancers get drugged and they go crazy or whatever. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but I'm a huge Gaspar Noé fan, and I can't wait to see Climax. So yes. So yes, I've seen Enter the Void. I love Enter the Void. I think Enter the Void's a masterpiece. I really do. That's why Keaton Toothman says, "Laugh out loud. That's why I use my name for YouTube. LOL." Yeah, man. Tom Gillard says, "R&B, can you convince Uncle Bobby Iger to come on to the John Campea show?" Well, for those of you who don't know, there is a running joke on the John Campea show that I'm friends with Bob Iger, the big honcho at Disney. I'm going to be honest with everybody here. I'm not friends with Bob Iger. I don't know Bob Iger. Bob Iger is a hero of mine. I think what he's done with Disney will go down in history as he's one of the great leaders of any studio, perhaps in the history of the entertainment business. I admire him greatly. Whenever I've heard him speak, he's very smart. He's very erudite. He's definitely one of my captains of industry, my heroes of heroes. I love Bob Iger, and I've been doing this ongoing bit where I pretend on the John Campea show that Bob Iger and I, like this last yesterday, we went and played our normal Sunday squash game, and then we went to Jeffrey's in Malibu, and I had my normal Sunday lobster. So, yes, that's it. And Keaton Toothman says, dude, you're the shit. Well, thanks for all the support since you're here and you're new. I appreciate all that. I appreciate all the support you guys give me. It's amazing. Everything that you guys do and say, and it's fantastically awesome, and it's nice to have all of these new voices here. So that is terrific. Mark C says you have to get Campea to watch Super Fuzz and Super Snooper starring Terrence Hill and Ernest Borgnine. I've not seen that. It's about a police officer with superpowers, except when he sees the color red. It's free on YouTube. Man, I'll watch that. So he's like Green Lantern. He's like the Green Lantern guy, but because Green Lantern, when he has yellow, he's depowered. I love that idea. Let's see what else is people have to say here. Mercer Create, my favorite recent film is Cloud Atlas. Yeah, you said that before. I'm a big fan. Richard Lee says, this is my first live stream. Been watching a few other videos after the fact. I'm glad to be here with someone I admire. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lee. That's very nice of you to hear. I appreciate that. PK Olson says, did you ever enjoy Mobius, Jean Giraud comics in the heavy metal days? Known for so much stuff, but his silent comics and vignettes are so breathtaking, full of crazy imagination and expertise. Yes, I love Mobius. I've always loved Mobius. I mean, even back, I think the first time I was aware of Mobius was when I started looking at behind-the-scenes stuff for Alien. And, back when Alien first came out, and that's why I sought out his comics. Like Epic Comics or Marvel Comics put out like the Inkle that he did with Joe Dorowski. And, of course, the Silver Surfer he did with... I love the joke they made in Crimson Tide about this. Like, look, Mobius drew like a 2-issue prestige format run, or it's a bigger run. Mobius did with Stan Lee, and it was great, but it certainly wasn't the definitive run. They have that argument in Crimson Tide about it. Al Zola's here. He says, hey Rob, what's up? Everything is up. We're all up. Here it is. We're up at 10 o'clock at night. Al Zola says, my name is Alex. Clockwork is great. Haven't watched it in years. Need to see it again. Yes, you do need to see it again. Matt Yamasaki says, although I'm not a fan of the film, I do understand why people enjoy it. Well, that's good. That's cool. Anthony Morales says, it's hard for me to pick a favorite Kubrick film, but Clockwork is the one I revisit most. Anthony Morales says, I've never heard of The Devils. There's no way of checking it out. Okay, for those of you who don't know, The Devils is a film that was directed by Ken Russell, who also directed movies like Altered States, and he directed Tommy, and he directed The Music Lovers and Gothic. He directed a movie called No, that was Nicholas Roeg. What am I saying? Nicholas Roeg directed Insignificance. But yes, it's a really subversive film about religious hysteria, and it's an incredible movie. But it's very, very difficult to see. It didn't used to be difficult to see, but it's difficult to see. You can't find it. And Warner Brothers owns the rights, but they've been sitting on it for whatever reason. I suspect that there's somebody, I don't know if they're still there at Warner Home Video, that was instrumental in making sure the movie was suppressed for religious grounds, and it shouldn't be. Yeah. Robert, Matt Limpicki asks, Robert, when was the last time you went comic book shopping, and what did you get? To be honest, I don't go to comic book stores as much as I used to. I buy my graphic novels either off Amazon or off the what is it called? cheapgraphicnovels.com. Is that where it is? Where you can get things at half price. But I'm always ordering omnibuses and things like that. You know what? It's funny you asked that. I'll tell you what the last thing I bought was, though. Now, I haven't read this yet, but this was the last thing I bought. comic wise. Berlin by Jason Lutz. Now I know people are probably going, what? But I read about this, and I honestly don't know much about it, but it's pretty extensive, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. But that was the last thing that I picked up. And again, I go a lot. I read a lot of like the New York Review of Books, or I read a lot of other people's reviews, and I tend to find things based on what other people tell me are good. And I'm constantly devouring things. But that was the last thing I picked up, and I got that from Amazon. So Dan V900 says, a perfect example of subversive movie that expects its audience to be smart is Annihilation, which came out last year and was a female-led movie about 4 intelligent women, but was not pushed at all. Alex Garland wrote and directed Annihilation, and when I first walked out of it, I didn't love it. I wanted to love it. I loved Ex Machina, which was his movie before that, but I've come to like the movie more, the more that I've thought about it. But yeah, I think it was a subversive movie, and it's really a movie about relationships and what people expect, and the destruction of things and destruction of people. And I think it's a really interesting, intriguing film, and I think it'll stand the test of time. But that was a movie that I'm sure the studio, Netflix ultimately picked up Annihilation. And I can understand the studio's like, what is this? Who are we going to sell this to? And to be fair, I mean, its audience, one of my favorite films, science fiction films especially, of the last 20 years is Mark Romanik's Never Let Me Go. And I've talked about it on these chats. The movie's devastating. It's incredibly well acted. It's based on it is science fiction, believe it or not. I mean, it's science fiction in the way I grew up with 70s sci-fi, where it wasn't spaceships, and a lot of it had science fiction. It has a science fiction concept. If you haven't seen Never Let Me Go, don't read about it. Just watch it, because it's devastating, and it's really, yes, it shares something along with Logan's Run and something with like The Island. People are like, The Island is a remake of Logan's Run, but it's a beautiful film. It's beautifully produced, and Rachel Portman's score will drive you to tears. So check it out. Matt Yamasaki says, hey, Rob, do you order all of your hot toys through Sideshow? Well, you should. To be honest, if you're going to order Hot Toys figures, you should order them through Sideshow, because if you do, Sideshow gives you points for every time you order figures through Sideshow. They give you points, and ultimately, I mean, you have to buy a lot of figures, but like I got my Vision Hot Toys figure, which I loved, for free, for points. And Sideshow is the American distributor for Hot Toys. But I am a big fan of Big Bad Toy Store. If you want to go to a great place, Big Bad Toy Store. There are 4 places that I frequent to buy the geeky stuff that I like, which is model kits and action figures or toys or whatever. And the Sideshow is one of them. Big Bad Toy Store is the other in terms of toys. And then I like to go to Cult TV Man for model kits, and Monsters in Motion, that has kind of a combination of the two. And like, for instance, Monsters in Motion, I bought the LED set for the EVA pod, but I don't know when it's going to come out, so who knows. But those are the places that I buy most of the stuff that I buy that's geeky. And then, of course, Amazon. And then if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, if you like Japanese science fiction and you like super robots, Hobby Link Japan. But I warned you. I just don't say I didn't warn you. If you like anime and super robots and diecast, like if I need, you remember when the bride says I need Japanese steel in Kill Bill? Well, I always say I need Japanese diecast. And if I feel that way, going to Hobby Link Japan, man, it's rough. It's a rough time. You will go insane. So I warn you. Pleasant Valley Picker, California says, by the way, Kubrick is my favorite director. Saw 2001 in the theater in my town in 1970 at age 11. Huge screen. They had renovated it by removing the seats as audiences were getting smaller by the 70s. I know. Isn't that sad? Yeah, it's not good. Dan V900 says, Revenge came out last year, but with a rape scene, which was just brutal. But it definitely wasn't pushed by a big studio and was a very good movie overall. I heard it was a good movie overall. I didn't see it. I want to see it. I saw the trailer. It looked good. I myself, Dan V900 says, I myself know that the movie Raw That's the French cannibal movie. French is not for me due to the content, but filmmakers can still make that type of movie, and I don't need to see a brutal rape scene in a movie. Look, I don't like rape scenes in movies either. It's not my thing. I mean, I spit on your grave. I can't even watch that movie anymore. But I agree with you. There's some things, although I think you should watch Raw. It's interesting because it was a French film directed by a female, and it's got a really interesting. This is why I'm all about all kinds of people making movies. You know, I've never been one saying, yeah, women and people of color shouldn't be. Give me a break. Look at Raw, man. Raw was directed by a French female, and you'll watch that movie. You'll dig it. Writer BL Alley says in 2001, the rotating section of the Discovery is far too small to generate 1 g of centrifugal acceleration at the speed shown, and you'd never be able to run or even walk due to the Coriolis effect. Well, you know, okay. Maybe. But theoretically, we don't exactly see how fast it's spinning. But I get your point. Richard Lee says, in a world on YouTube where channels scream agenda, woke negative actions, you're with us or against us, box office rigs, so it's nice to have a channel that teaches and entertains like yours does. Well, Richard, thank you for that. I mean, you know, I don't understand, like what like I say, we live in the post-geek singularity, man. I mean, look at this. I got Pearl here. I got Pearl right here. I got the new Gaspar Noé movie here, which I haven't seen. I got my 2001 pod that I've been waiting for my whole life. I got my Enterprise ring ship from Star Trek: The Motion Picture on the rec deck of the Enterprise. I got the motion picture. I mean, look, I don't know. All of these people that, you know what? I forgot. I have a story to tell. And I was going to start out this chat, and I got this. I have a story to tell today, and since you just reminded me, you just reminded me of this. So I'm going to tell a story. This is a story that happened to me today. And I was in an Uber, or a Lyft, pardon me. I was taking a Lyft, and I was going to my post house, the post house I'm working at Tango Shalom on. And I was being driven there, and I met a gentleman. My driver was named Candido Carter. His name was Candido Carter, a black dude. And it's funny, we had a conversation about words that people call each other. And he said it's okay to call him a black dude. He's an artist. He's a filmmaker. Really, really smart guy. And Candido Carter is his Instagram handle. And he said something very interesting. We were having a conversation today about just this very subject. People were angry. People were talking. And he said something really interesting that I'd never heard before. And he said that through his work, what he wants to do with his work and what he says and what he tells people, he wants to be a purveyor of the way he thinks the world should be after everyone finally comes to grips with all of these problems and being woke and all that. That through his work, he wants to pretend we're already in that world. And he said to me when we were talking, he goes, you know, you kind of are that way. The way I was talking to him is like you're espousing beliefs that I tend to agree with about the world and how it should be once we all settle down and get a hold of ourselves. And I thought that was really interesting. The idea that through his work, he was just going to assume that we already are enlightened and that we already are teaching and treating each other, teaching the things that we should be teaching and treating each other the way we should be treating each other, that he's just going to assume that people will understand, and he's just going to talk that way. So the way he wants the world is the way he's going to act like the world is. So hopefully through his actions and through his artwork, he will be sort of leading by example. And I thought that was really interesting. And I would like to think that this channel is like that. Like I'm trying to be the way I think the world should be. And to me, we live in this wondrous time of the post-geek singularity where all of our geekiness and everything that we want and everything that we desire is here. Like we're getting it. Like people are making it for us and they're trying to make us cool stuff. I mean, look what's happening in April, just to be between Game of Thrones and Endgame and Hellboy and Shazam and all the other things that are going on. I mean, there's just so much to love, and there's so much excitement happening in the anger, the horrible things that happen in the world. I talked about what happened in New Zealand, and all of those. There's enough horrible things, and why anybody in the geek sphere, and I say geek with love, or why anybody is angry. I mean, it's beyond me. Now, I'm not saying we should eat anything that's shoveled down into our pie holes. We shouldn't do that. We should be what? Imagination connoisseurs. Always be an imagination connoisseur. Listen, I could make an argument that this week's episode of Star Trek Discovery was the worst episode of Star Trek I have ever seen in my life. I thought it was abhorrent. I thought it was a low point in all of Star Trek history. Honestly, I thought the way Star Trek, the way Spock was written by Michelle Paradise, the new showrunner of Star Trek, was talk about offensive. I mean, unbelievable. And what they did to a character, I mean, my God, what show was I watching? I don't know. But, I don't want to go off on that because I know lots of people do like Discovery, and I don't begrudge them that. I, however, wanted to shoot my television. I didn't because, it's my favorite, my Panasonic. It's 3D, and I would hate to see that anything happen to it. That would bum me out. Dale M says, Rob, you will love having 2 dogs. I couldn't imagine having only one. But my dogs have been together since the womb, so the only time they were apart was when one was born after the other. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this mysterious dog that might show up, I don't know how it's going to get here, but we'll see. I don't know how Gilbert the Gilberian from the planet Gilbar is going to respond. Gil Bovel says, R&B, William F. Nolan wrote a new screenplay for Logan's Run, and they continue to ignore it. I haven't read that one. I do, however, have a Richard Maibaum script for Logan's Run that he wrote in the late 60s. Richard Maibaum wrote a lot of the early Bond movies, actually in the mid-Bond movies too. And he actually wrote a draft of a script for Logan's Run, and they had to send a letter in front of it explaining what it was. I should dig that out. I should put that online somewhere. Pleasant Valley Picker, California says, wish Rob would see comments written by us poor riffraff. Oh, well. Yes, sir, I do, but I have to, if people are going to support the channel, I gotta go back and support the channel. But you're right. Learning Disabled Spock says, have you seen either of the Panos Cosmatos movies, Beyond the Black Rainbow and or Mandy? Yes, sir. Not only have to be honest, I'll be honest. I own both of them on Blu-ray. Mandy is literally sitting underneath my TV waiting to be watched. But Beyond the Black Rainbow is a favorite. Panos Cosmatos is actually the son of George Cosmatos, who directed Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and Cobra. A lot of other movies, too. Pleasant Valley Picker, California says, don't be afraid the dark was fun. Yes, sir. Watch it. Pleasant Valley Picker, California says, Trilogy of Terror with that doll effed me up bad. Scared the hell out of me. Yeah, it's great. You know what? Kino Lorber releasing them on Blu-ray. You can get Trilogy of Terror. You can get Kolchak the Night Stalker. You can get the Night Strangler. The TV movies is great. Dan V900 says Final Destination 5, spoiler alert, was a prequel to the first Final Destination movie, and that was a great twist. I didn't know that. Nay says Django is very subversive considering the climate. I agree. Richard Lee says, what's your favorite scary movie? Gosh, my favorite scary, it's funny because I still think The Exorcist is probably one of the scariest movies, but The Exorcist only works, again, it's an intellectual horror film. Now it's hard for people to go back and get scared by that because of just the style it was made and all that. I'll tell you a movie that got under my skin lately that I thought was really pretty good was The Autopsy of Jane Doe. As far as scary movies go, that was pretty good. To me, that was an efficient scare machine. I really like The Autopsy of Jane Doe. And, from what's coming out of South by Southwest, really excited for Pet Sematary. I think that sounds really good. So I check that out. Thomas Frost says, hey, R&B, what's your guilty B movie pleasure? I've been digging into the canon library lately, but my favorite is Samurai Cop. It's magnificently bad. You know, on our action movies of the 80s podcast today, I was going to talk about American Ninja with Michael Dudikoff and Steve James. I mean, those early canon action films that Sam Furstenberg directed, you can't go wrong with American Ninja. But I think my favorite bad B movie I talk about all the time is Star Crash. I know it's I know. Pleasant Valley Picker, California says the Warriors movie set in New York is awesome. Yes, it is, and I can recite that whole movie back and forth. I swear to God, I've seen that movie a million times. Can you count, suckers? I say the future is ours if you can count. Good stuff. Rollerball, directed by Pleasant Valley says, directed by Canadian Norman Jewison. So much American culture is actually created by Canadians. Well, I blame Canada. The Exalted says, Night of the Living Dead, any stories watching one? Night of the Living Dead was one of the first pre-recorded video cassettes I ever owned. I love Night of the Living Dead. I even like the remake, the 1990 remake. I think it's pretty good. So yeah, I do like that. A Victory Unlimited show says, recently saw my favorite sci-fi movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. It still holds up. Gotta love any movie that ends with a threatening speech. Yes, it does, and you are correct. By the way, Day the Earth Stood Still is really good. I mean, if you look at the great, I mean, the 50s still some of my favorite science fiction movies. You've got Conquest of Space. You've got War of the Worlds and When Worlds Collide. You've got Them, which is a great movie. You've got Forbidden Planet. You've got Day the Earth Stood Still. I mean, the Quatermass movies. I think Quatermass 2 is 55 or something. There's so many great science fiction films in the 50s. You gotta love that. I'm a big fan. And Day the Earth Stood Still is really good, and it does end with a pretty hardcore speech. Mark C says, oh my God, what do we have to do to get an animated adaptation of The Inkle? I don't know, but wouldn't that be great? I would love to see that. I mean, I read that like 4 times. I love The Inkle. It's crazy. Gil Bovel says, pronounced, Bavel. Gil Bavel, pronounced Bavel. What are your feelings about Galaxy of Terror? How do you feel R.E. James Cameron's first foray into the alien universe? I love Galaxy of Terror. For those of you who don't know, if you haven't seen, Roger Corman's was it New Concord Pictures or New World? What was it? It wasn't New World. So Roger Corman made a lot of I think really great B science fiction horror and sci-fi horror movies in the early 80s. The first, of course, was Battle Beyond the Stars. And then he recycled that footage in a lot of other movies. But James Cameron famously worked on Galaxy of Terror. And Galaxy of Terror is a pretty shameless alien ripoff, but it has some really incredible effects work in it, and it has some really creepy stuff in it. Erin Moran, Joni from Happy Days is in it, and she basically gets, I think, raped by a giant tentacled caterpillar creature in a weird alien pyramid. Ray Walston is in it. A Galaxy of Terror has a really, really interesting vibe. I mean, if you haven't seen Galaxy of Terror, I highly recommend watching Battle Beyond the Stars and Galaxy of Terror. They're really good movies. There was a movie they made after Galaxy of Terror called Forbidden World, both, by the way, of which I own on Blu-ray, that is not as good, but still interesting. I mean, these are B movies that got released to theaters, man. I mean, now they'd be relegated to the basement of Netflix, but Galaxy of Terror is really great. And, famously, it was one of those movies that James Cameron did visual effects on, and he did matte paintings for, kind of like the work he did. He worked also on like Escape from New York as well. Bavel. I like Bavel, like Marvel. Well, thank you for that, Gil. I appreciate that. Mark C says, by the way, Superfuzz has an amazing funky disco theme song that must be heard. I got to go watch this stuff. I got to see that. Dan Peters says, Lorna is sixth in the Conjuring universe. Is it? Is it in the Conjuring? It looks great. That scene, I haven't seen it yet, but that scene in the back seat of the car, that looks great. Magic K asks, any thoughts on Kevin Sujihara's exit? Well, for those who don't know, Kevin Tsujihara was exposed. He was having a consensual affair with an actress 6 years ago, trying to help her get parts. And she was texting back and forth with Brett Ratner and another billionaire. And he developed a sexual relationship with her, and he's a married guy. And my thoughts, I was not a big fan of Kevin Tsujihara's tenure at Warner Brothers. I mean, it was my first studio I ever worked at, so it's always felt like my home. But honestly, reading those texts in Kim Masters' article was really embarrassing. I mean, look, powerful studio executives that run studios have always had a long history of philandering in the past. It's not something new to Hollywood, but you want to believe that these guys are it's funny because now these guys, they're kind of geeks like us, and you want to think that Kevin Tsujihara had a beautiful wife and a great life, and he sort of threw it away on I think that girl's, if you read the emails, she had an agenda that was pretty transparent. So I feel bad for Kevin Tsujihara, but I'm hoping that Walter Hamada's stewardship of especially the DC universe continues on, because I think they're doing a great job. There goes Gilbert, by the way, everyone. For those of you who haven't been here before, Gilbert is co-host of this show. Carl Aldis says, "Hi, Rob. I'm a newish watcher listener. Do you have an Amazon wish list? Keep up the great content. You're forging the way. Live long and prosper." I don't have an Amazon wish list. I don't. I could make one. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I probably put like hard drives and computer equipment and cables and things like that in it. But yeah, I suppose I should. My Amazon wish list would probably be graphic novels and Blu-rays. But yes, I don't. Daniel Ring says, "Makes me glad I didn't subscribe to Star Trek Discovery." Look, again, people like Star Trek Discovery. I don't want to alienate anyone that loves Discovery, because there's people that Discovery is their first Star Trek show, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm glad they like it, and I hope they discover the joys of the original Star Trek. I just think if your first experience with Star Trek is Discovery, you're never going to be able to go back and watch the original series. Learning Disabled Spock asks a really good question. Rob, why do you think that animation hasn't caught on in the West as a storytelling medium in the way that anime has? Well, here's the thing. There is an element of whimsy that I think is lacking from our culture. Americans are not whimsical. And if you look at like Asian culture, Japanese culture, the way they can anthropomorphize just about anything, their love of robots and mechanical devices and things like Hello Kitty. Why is it that Matsumoto Leiji could create something like, or be one of the creators of Space Battleship Yamato or Star Blazers, where a battleship or Galaxy Express, which, by the way, the two Galaxy Express movies came out on Blu-ray as well, can be in space? There's an element of whimsy to these cultures that I don't think we have here. And when you have that, when you're looking at comic or anime storytelling, there's anime about, and there's manga about golf. They tell any stories that they want, of all kinds of stories, all lifestyles in that. And Americans, I think that we as Americans, we give up something. We it's just not in our makeup to, maybe it's because we were pioneers and we pushed out west, and of course the Japanese had the samurai. So I don't know. I've read books on manga and what it means, and it's a very interesting question. I think that Europeans and Asians have been human beings a lot longer than Americans have. Thousands of years longer. So maybe that has something to do with it. Like they're much more comfortable with their humanity than we are. Like we still want to pretend the idea that our geeky interests are geeky, it's like pop music. Pop music is much more important in the UK, and all age groups are represented. I don't know. That's a really good question. I often ponder this. Matt Yamasaki says, Rob, you should get your hot toys at Frankensons. I got my hot toys at sideshow price minus 5%, no tax, no shipping charges. I'll tell you, I love, for those who don't know what Matt Yamasaki is saying, there is It's a collector's show called Frankensons that exists. I think it's out. It's not Irwindale. It's somewhere out on this right off the 605. But yes, I have bought Hot Toys figures there before, and yeah, you can get them cheaper. You can also get old ones you're missing and bootleg figures, and it's great. I love going to Frankensons. There's one guy there that he has a great collection. Anthony Morales says, my favorite horror film is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, also one of the scariest movies ever made. The documentary style they used, the filmmaking style in that movie, it's terrifying. The original Texas Chainsaw has lost none of its power. And even John Larroquette's opening narration, yes, that John Larroquette, it never loses any of its power. I agree. One of the great movies of all time, horror movies of all time. Richard Lee, favorite horror movie icon and Universal monster. I think my favorite Universal monster, probably the Wolfman is my favorite Universal monster, but I really like Creature from the Black Lagoon. And my favorite horror movie icon, it's got to be the Tall Man from Phantasm. Phantasm is one of my favorite horror films of all time. It's almost like a kid's movie with blood, but I love Phantasm. I love the Tall Man. You play a good game, boy, but the game is finished. Now you die. I love that. It's not a very good Tall Man impression, though. The official Dougie J says, I saw Star Crash in the theater in 1979, and my 9-year-old self thought it was the coolest movie I had ever seen. Probably had something to do with Caroline Munro. I know, right? A couple years back, I got a Caroline Munro Star Crash 6-scale action figure. Couldn't believe they made it. Fantastic. Aaron Johnson says, hello, Rob. There's so much stuff Kubrick created. There's a Kubrick film that holds up next to 2001, Dr. Strangelove, and Eyes Wide Shut with Tom Cruise. The film Spartacus with Kirk Douglas. I agree. Dude, Barry Lyndon. I mean, so good. The official Dougie J says, Battle Beyond the Stars is another guilty pleasure. Richard Thomas in full galactic John Boy mode, plus the great George Peppard and Robert Vaughn. I love Battle Beyond the Stars. John Sayles wrote the screenplay. It is famously sort of a space remake of The Magnificent Seven. It's so good. Blake St. Clair says, I watched some of the old Superman cartoons by Fleischer. The technique in those is phenomenal, far superior to anything being made today in the 2D form. Those kinds of artists are lost to time. I agree. The Fleischer Superman cartoons are amazing. That artwork is amazing. So gorgeous. Thomas Frost says, are you into SH Figure Arts? I went deep into the Star Wars line, which can't be sold in the US technically. The Infinity line is pure art. Yes, I am not into the SH Figure Arts line just because I only collect 6-scale figures now. I've only collected them for a while. As I explained, I did get the 1/12th, the Mezco 1/12th, Dawn of the Dead, and Clockwork Orange figure, the Alex figure. I'm going to get the Danger Diabolic figure, but those SH Figure Arts figures are incredible. They're Japanese, by the way, and they're amazing. They're so good. I just don't collect that line. I only collect 6-scale, and now I'm really only collecting. I'll get the occasional bootleg figure like that Stallone figure, but I really only collect. I collect sideshow figures like their Jack Burton or their Snake Plissken or things that Hot Toys doesn't make. But I'm really almost Hot Toys only now when I collect figures because I'm an old man. I shouldn't be buying figures anyway, but I can't not buy them. Sebastian says, have you seen the new teaser for the new movie from my country's most infamous director, Tom Six, director of the Human Centipede movies? It's quite weird. No, I have not, and now I want to go watch that. I didn't know he made another movie. Well, listen, Learning Disabled Spock says, Rob, you get to captain a starship from any universe. What do you name it? That's a good question. I would probably name it, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I know in the Space Rob video game, Space Rob has a spaceship called the Kubrick, so maybe I would call it that. But I would probably pick something from history. It's been done before because in Life Force, the space shuttle in Life Force was named the Churchill. But I'm a big fan of Winston Churchill, so maybe or maybe the USS Marcus Aurelius. That's what I would name my starship. I'd want it to be the Refit Enterprise. This Enterprise from Star Trek The Motion Picture, I'd call it the USS Marcus Aurelius. That would be the name of my starship. That would be the shit. Casanova Frankenstein asks, did you watch One Cut of the Dead yet? I have not. One Cut of the Dead is still right here on my desk. I have not watched it yet. I need to watch. I'm so busy with Tango Shalom and doing our podcasts and all this. I haven't had time. Of course, the time I'm sitting here talking to you, I could be watching it. Mark C says, Battle Beyond the Stars, Sybil Danning, Saint X-Men of the Valkyrie. Live fast, fight free, and have a beautiful ending. And she does. Let's see. Bunyan Snipe says, Space Valkyrie for the win, or the Gilbert. Yes. Well, listen, everybody, I'm going to bring this chat to a close because I have bulky pickup coming in the morning, and I have to take a bunch of stuff to put out on the sidewalk for bulky pickup to take. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here. I know there was a lot of new faces here tonight, which was great. Normally I do these chats during the day, or I'm trying to dry out a little, so I'm not doing Ripped with Rob. But maybe I'll bring that back in a couple months. Who knows? But anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks for all the new people who are here. Please subscribe to the channel, share the channel, visit my website, theburnettwork.net. Send me, interesting missives. Tell me interesting stories. Give me things I should read. Tell me things I should see. And send me a message if you want me to read it. Or if you don't want me to read it on this channel, don't tell me not to. If you only want me to share your first name, I'm happy to do that. Whatever you want. But all of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, thank you for being here. And I always sign off with, for you new people, I always say the same thing, which is every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I'm going to bid you all farewell. I will see you tomorrow on the John Campea Show at 9 a.m., and hopefully you'll be back here tomorrow. I have a great letter to read. I'll probably be here either at noon or 1. And that letter is from longtime listener or longtime watcher. Well, not long time, for the past 2 months. Celadon Sound from the UK. So be back tomorrow. And as always, have a better day or have a better evening. And thanks again for all the support. I really appreciate it.